Welcome to Commit and Push, the podcast about how great software really gets built. I'm Damien Filiatrault, your host and the founder of Scalable Path. Each episode, I talk with founders, developers, and leaders about the decisions, trade-offs, and hard lessons behind successful digital products. Let's get into it. So I'm here today with Rob Whiteley, who's the CEO of Coder. Welcome to the podcast, Rob.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So you want to start off by telling us just what Coder does as a company?
Yep, absolutely. So we've had one mission that stays the same, but like everybody, AI has kind of thrown our world into a tizzy. But we're a developer productivity. So our number one goal is just to help developers be more productive. For the last couple of years, that was really how do we just take friction over setting up your environment, right? A lot of developers, when they start a new project or started a new company, there's a lot of scaffolding that has to be set up to make them successful. And for big companies, that's a really bad locked down experience. We fix that. Increasingly, it's now all AI related. How do I make AI part of my workflow? How do I make agents part of my workflow? And so I think that's becoming, you can almost think of it as a use case, but it is predominantly the use case that customers are currently chasing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, these environments were initially built for human developers, and I guess some developers are still using them, but then people started running agents in these environments. Was that something that you guys built features for and then people started doing it, or were people just starting doing it on their own? Or
it's a little bit of both. And by the way, I'm happy to give you a more technical definition of what Coder does, if that helps the audience.
Well, yeah,
but
yeah.
For now, okay,
sure.
So for me, you can think of, so Coder is a platform you run centrally in your cloud, right? Cloud being a data center, a public cloud, private cloud, we don't care. And it basically does two things. Southbound, it speaks infrastructure. So it knows how to provision your compute, your storage, your GPUs, like whatever you as a developer would need. So think of it as almost building a virtual desktop for you. And then northbound, it has an abstraction called a Workspace, which is going to be all your tools, all your credentials, everything you need configuration-wise for how you would do that. And so basically, we're taking the the MacBook Pro, which is hardware and software all in one, decoupling it and then moving it to the cloud, right? So we configure the hardware and then we also configure all your tools. And so I, as a developer, can now log into this remote thing, and it's essentially like a virtual desktop.
Right. And so if you're running VS Code, you're running it in Coder, and you're kind of getting like this virtual desktop version of VS Code.
Yep, exactly. And so, in fact, we started life as a fork of VS Code called Code Server. And we were creating Code Server in a browser that would run on a central server. And then our customers kept saying, well, can you add this and add that? And by the time we were done adding everything, we had become this like full-featured provisioning engine with a full-featured policy engine on top of an IDE. And so what we've since learned is being an IDE is actually a terrible business to be in because they're all free and commoditized. Mm-hmm. And so, well, except for Cursor. And so what we did was kind of get out of the IDE business and say, okay, we'll provision any IDE, any compute, any environment. Like you just tell us what you would like to use and we'll make that an easy button for you. Mm-hmm. And so that background kind of is needed because it was probably a little over a year ago where our customers were coming to us and saying, hey, you're the way we deploy VS Code at scale for the organization. Right, so a customer of ours might have anywhere from hundreds to thousands to sometimes even tens of thousands of developers. And so consistency in managing things is always a nightmare. And they're saying we have to deploy this thing called Copilot, right? Everybody wants it. It helps with productivity. We think of you as our productivity booster. And so one of the things we enabled was that every time as you as a developer went to go use VS Code, unbeknownst to you, it had Copilot, the right version of Copilot, logged in with the right credentials. We can block things and enable things. And so we kind of ended up creating this enterprise governance layer, this control plane for Copilot. And life was good for all of about 6 months until customers came along and said, you know what, we really want Claude Code. That would be more interesting to us. Or we want to use Cursor and this thing called background agents. And so I think what happened is code assistance quickly went from a must-have to like I'm already over that. I want these more fully capable agents, and I need to be able to either just use them for little tasks or give them whole projects. And we can get into like the pros and cons.
Can I pause on something you just said? Like your second, like you just said, people are over code completion. Like they're still using it, right?
Yeah, they're still using it. I think they're over. It's not the end game, right? So I think it is extremely helpful, but I think a lot of people are realizing that just auto-completing my line is not super interesting. What I want to do is research a code base and understand what the best structure would be for it, or propose a unit test that I want to write. And so it's almost like mini agentic use cases and then a side hustle of helping me with code completion. And, Copilot has scaled to go and provide some of these things. But I think it was really Cursor that cracked this nut, where they kind of put AI directly into the workflow, made it super capable. And that's when developers' brains unlocked to say, oh, this isn't just like hit tab and complete a line. It's more like I'm offloading low value grunt tasks to go be done to help and pipe the answer back to me while I'm still in flow. And that became like, to me, that's the current state of the art right now. So let me pause. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you were telling a story about, how your product evolved based on these, demands from customers.
Yeah. So I think what really hit me was, I think the first conversation I really had was with Anthropic, and they're a huge Cursor shop, love Cursor. But they'd made the decision to run Claude Code in its own bespoke environment, right? So they didn't want to run it locally on the laptop because Claude Code's just a CLI, so it can be invoked from anywhere, and that's kind of how Cursor was invoking it. But they were like, we really need it to be in its own walled garden. And so they were kind of, I wouldn't say hacking our product, but doing somewhat unnatural things to it, where they were standing up a full developer stack, full developer environment with all tooling that you give a human, and then putting Claude Code in it and saying, here you go, Claude Code, have at it. And they were giving it much more full autonomous tasks. Now, they're the makers of Claude Code, so of course they're going to trust this technology far more. But what I will give them credit is, I do think you can look at the Anthropics of today and see where the enterprise of tomorrow is going to be, right? Like, I do think this is 2 years out from being a reality for a more mainstream company. And so I can get into it, but what we really did is we spent like a month just really debugging with them. What does this architecture look like with an agent running in its own environment? And that's what we really have spent the last probably 5 months productizing, is a whole set of very specific capabilities that make agents productive.
Yeah. So what are some of those?
The biggest we learned, and this was sort of my aha moment, and I think one of the greatest things Anthropic did for the world was MCP, multi-context protocol. It's basically a way to give tools to an agent. Because look, my super dopey definition of an agent is it's just a Gen AI call in a loop, where it does something, completes it, loops back to itself and sees if it should keep going. And then eventually it thinks it's done and it exits the loop and says, here's my work. But what you can do in that loop is give it more tools. Because really Claude Code right out of the box knows how to read code, write code, and execute code. That's it. So if you want it to do anything like get access to GitHub, be able to clone repos, be able to read websites, those are not tools that Claude Code has at its disposal. So Anthropic created MCP as a way to like basically give Claude Code a tool belt, and then you can stick all different tools in it, right? And what we realized is most people who set up agents have no idea how to set up MCP, have no idea how to equip it at scale. And so they were setting up these agents that were extremely dumb, very basic, asking it to complete a task. It would fail or do a bad job, and they would say, this is not ready for prime time. I'm getting no value. But it's really like they took an agent, parachuted, or a software intern, if you want the human analogy, parachuted it into an unknown company blindfolded, took the blindfold off and said, get to work. And it's like, well, where am I? What am I supposed to do? What do I like? Do I have a pen? Do I have paper? What? Whereas what's interesting about, and I'll say a coder environment, but it could be any cloud development environment. There are many, is because it's all provisioned as code. The first thing Claude Code does when it boots up is ingest its own environment as context, right? So it now knows exactly what it's running on, where it is, what it has access to, what it doesn't have access to, because all of that is stored in a file that it can read. And
is that something specific that you guys did in your coder environment, or is that just what it does on any environment?
Would it impress you if I said yes? Because it's not true.
Okay.
No, it was a happy coincidence because, you know, we're Terraform based, if you're familiar with Terraform. So everything we're doing gets stored in a Terraform file. And so what Claude is, an extremely entrepreneurial little thing, is it would just immediately read its Terraform file and it would know everything about itself. And so the first thing we learned is giving an agent that context is great. And then the next thing we learned is if in that Terraform you define MCP tools, not only does it learn its environment, but it puts tools in its tool belt, and then it's off and does a great job. And so now we did a lot to make it easier so that you can reliably get Claude to boot up, find this file. So basically we hydrate Claude with all of this right out of the gate. Whereas if you just deployed naked Claude, it wouldn't. So we've made it easier, but I think what we learned the hard way, and by the way, Anthropic didn't even really fully appreciate why Claude Code was so effective inside of a coder workspace until we debugged all this. And so I think the biggest thing we learned is, agents need infrastructure. And we see that all throughout the industry. Every major agent solution gets deployed in either a VM or a container and is given basic tools like GitHub, browsers. So it needs infrastructure and it needs context. And those are the two things that we set out to do for humans. And it just so happens that it's tailor-made for agents because a human we spin up and their project will live for hours, days, or weeks. And an agent will get spun up and its project lives for seconds or minutes, right? And so everything we kind of put into the automation is necessary in the agentic world because these things are so ephemeral. And they just, like a really long-lived agentic task today would be like 30 minutes.
So a quick pause here. I wanted to tell you a bit about why I started my software staffing company, Scalable Path. Back in 2008, I was working on a client project with some developers in Argentina, and I saw how amazing it was working with people in my time zone who were just as available as people in my office. So in 2010, I started Scalable Path to help companies take advantage of this underutilized talent pool. And since then, we've built a platform of over 40,000 developers, and we've placed over 600 of them with over 300 clients. So if you're looking to hire top-notch dev talent at a fraction of the cost of hiring locally, visit scalablepath.com/commit. And as a listener of the podcast, you can get 20% off your first month. I'd love for you to give us a try.
We're seeing with Max 5 now, you could probably let it run for a day without feeling like you're just lighting tokens on fire.
What's Max 5?
So, GPT-5 Max is, that model is the one I trust the most, probably second to Opus 4.4.1 in the Anthropic world, to run for hours of unsupervised time. But I don't think people appreciate that that's tens to maybe $100. And that's a high cost experiment to run.
The tokens that it will consume.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, just to get, sorry if this isn't interesting, so just shut me up. But
no, it's all good.
If I run GPT-5, I'll probably spend 15 cents on a session, but I'll have to run 100 sessions to get a good output. And then if I put it in max mode, I can let it run for a couple of hours, but it's going to cost $100. So you're kind of getting to the same cost in the end. It's just a matter of, do you want to coach it each step of the way, checking its output, or do you want to kind of put it in YOLO mode and just hope it comes back with a good answer? And I think for most companies, they're not ready to spend that money yet. And so they would much rather do these little experiments. And to kind of close the loop, but if you don't set the agent up for success, you're guaranteed those little experiments will fail and that you're just going to conclude this stuff is not ready. But I mean, actually on a separate webinar, Anthropic said Claude Code has written 70% of its own code, right? So that is a production level application that millions of people use. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially, a human will review the code, mm-hmm. but 70% of the actual merged live code was written autonomously and simply checked by a human. Mm-hmm. So I find it really hard to believe to say these things aren't ready for prime time. I think it's a question of, are you ready for prime time? Because you might not have configured it correctly, or you might just not trust it yet, right? Like I don't trust it to replace a software engineer yet. So
the idea of letting some agent like this run for a day or something is kind of new to me. What do you have any examples of what kind of feature or what kind of a project that this agent would be working on that would need you to just give it full autonomy and work for that long without feedback?
Yeah. Yep. I can give you a couple examples. First of all, agents are really good at front end code. They're really bad at back end code, right? And I think it's because agents are trained on the world's knowledge. Most of the world is actually front end code, at least the internet. And so they have lots and lots of examples to learn from. And so, but those tend to be shorter tasks. Like I can ask it to create a fairly complex web application and it will take it 10 to 15 minutes. And then I can iterate it in small minute chunks. If you ask it to do anything back end, it's going to take a lot longer because it's going to have to go.
When you say back end, what do you mean?
Like infrastructure stuff, like if it has to figure out networks and protocols and database calls and all the kind of the back end plumbing. And so those take a lot longer. And so an example we had is we needed to completely refactor a code base from one language to another. Mm-hmm. And it went for like 6 hours without interruption of just
okay, but that makes sense. Just refactoring an entire code base, like
right. Okay. Or another example is like, again, forget what Coder is. It's an application. It has a browser-based front end and a back end that's got all sorts of Terraform databases. The marketing team wanted to create a clickable demo of Coder on the website so you could go use it. But I don't want to provision. So we needed to sever the back end from the front end. And so the agent had to go through and systematically find every API call, stub it off, return dummy data. And so it just took hours chugging through finding, and it would have to find an API call, test it, figure out if it worked or not. That would break something over here. So it would go test it. You can give it and say, do not stop until you have run a 100% clean test. And it will try. It'll go and go and go. And so that's where I've seen it get into 7, 8, 9 hours of coding is when it's doing something really complicated like that. Mm-hmm. But you have to be using one of the more recent models that has quote unquote reasoning built into it. Otherwise, it will not have the ability to iterate on itself.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Last time we spoke, you were talking about, Claude Sonnet was like the LLM that everyone was using. Do you still think that way? I mean, what are the most common tools and agents and models that people are running inside your environments?
Yeah,
What's working best?
I'll give you two answers. Coder's a small enterprise, very small startup, versus what I see in larger enterprise customers. I still prefer Claude. I still prefer Sonnet models. I don't like the way the newest GPT-5 has been tuned. It's a little verbose in its internal monologue, which does not make for the best coding experience. Sonnet is much more like, I'm just going to create a to-do list, and I'm just going to keep going back to that to-do list. And so, whereas I think GPT-5 is like you've cracked open someone's brain and you're watching every thought stream. And it's just a little, like, if you literally leave it alone and don't worry about it, it's great. But if you're actually trying to do smaller tasks, it literally feels like someone is rambling in front of you. Very capable. But so anyway, from a pure UX perspective, I prefer Sonnet, and Opus is my preferred. Like, if I was going to get a Rolls-Royce model, that's what I would use. What I'm seeing in the large enterprise is we don't know. We're already using OpenAI because we love ChatGPT, so we want to use that in our coding use case. And so what a lot of companies are having to do is get this. Usually they're an AWS shop, so they're getting something called Bedrock as almost this middleware layer that sits above the model and below the AI application. And there's a lot of value in it, but essentially what they're doing is they're getting an AWS hosted version of OpenAI so that they know that it's safe, that it's not, their data isn't going out to the OpenAI data centers and training the next generation of models. And so the most common stack I've seen is pick your favorite agent. I see a lot of Amazon Q connected to Bedrock, connected to OpenAI, Cursor connected to Bedrock, connected to OpenAI, or Claude Code connected to Bedrock, connected to Sonnet. Those are the three stacks that I would say 90% of all deployments I see are in some way, shape, or form that.
Okay, and your clients are mainly larger companies, I assume. Like, the world I'm in is more like the startup world.
Yeah,
and I'm curious. Like, is your product affordable? Is it for a small team?
It is, in that it's open source, and so our goal is, if you are 50 or under, use the open source. It is full featured. We come from the school of thought where we don't ever want the developer experience to be pay gated. We just put a whole bunch of security and governance controls in place. And it isn't until you start getting into hundreds or thousands of developers that you really care about that stuff. So we have tons of startups that use the open source version. And then large enterprise, it's mostly about, I want to be indemnified, I want support, I want the governance. So what I'm saying when I say customer, paying customer, yes, it's skewed towards very large organizations, but we have plenty of small that use us. And so what I would say that is a little bit different about startups is they don't trust agents almost at all. And so the most common template there is Cursor connected to Coder directly. And so I'm just using Cursor's basic AI capabilities, nothing super sophisticated from an agent. And it's because what I have found, and I don't mean to belittle large enterprises, but the average startup employee is a little more tech savvy, and they're ahead of where an agent is today. Agents are like software interns. And so they find that the agent just slows them down, and they would much rather just get inline help. Right. So
that's interesting. Let's break that down a little. So,
yeah,
because you said startups don't trust agents. What did you mean by that?
To me, the agent has two sweet spots today, regardless of your size. Doing basic software tasks or vibe coding. And so in most companies that I've talked to, the vibe coders are outside of software engineering, and they're just vibe coding little applications like a finance calculator, or if they're doing anything business related at all, they're most likely vibe coding like a, birthday party for their nephew's dog, right? And so a lot of it is not very important, and so it's okay to trust it. But I do see more and more, I'm going to try to automate this business process by creating a little web application that helps the team do it. And I think IT is saying, sure, have at it, right? Deploy to Vercel, good luck. And so when I say trust, I mean the software engineers, the core people who are either making a product or offering a service. And so what I've seen there is the cost-benefit trade-off isn't always there, right? Like the agent provided some help, but I spent almost as much time checking its work.
This is the feedback I'm getting from devs on my team, right? I'm saying yeah. I'm talking to Rob Whiteley, who says everyone's going to be using agents, they will really quick. And so let's keep trying all this. And, they're saying, well, yeah, I think it's going to take me more time.
Yeah.
Because the agent doesn't have the same like mental model of the business and the everything. And we've got part of our code base is legacy, and the agent can't even work on that because it's old code and it doesn't have enough training data. And
and so I think I kind of the only thing that comes to mind, I'm an old engineer, is the bathtub reliability curve, where you have really high frequency at low and nothing in the middle. And so the adoption pattern I've seen of agents follows this bathtub curve, meaning really, really inexperienced engineers use it a lot, really, really senior engineers use it a lot, and no one in the middle uses it. And I think what the senior engineers have learned, these are my like principal level, kind of fellow level folks, is they're really good at breaking problems down into very discrete tasks and then giving that task and having like 7 agents working on their behalf simultaneously. And they're almost just like a conductor, working through it. And they love it because it's novel, but they're really good at that. They're almost acting like virtual software engineering managers. And then the junior engineers love it because it allows them to approach a code base they know nothing about and kind of get working real quick. And then I truly believe everyone in the middle gets diminishing returns because I either don't trust it, I didn't prompt it correctly, I didn't set it up correctly, so I'm getting slop code out the back end. And so I think what will happen is over time, we're going to get into a best practices where we know how to give agents the right tools. We give them the right infrastructure. We give them all the context and security so they can work on real problems. And then I think you'll see that curve begin to flatten out a little bit. And then it's going to be a pure mindset. I either like AI or I don't. I either think it's taking my job or it's not. And it'll probably be more of a resistance to the idea than it will be a technology capability. I would have said that like the readiness of the technology to take this on, like after seeing how big a leap GPT-5 could take, I think we're like 6 months away from, as long as you set the agent up correctly, it'll be very capable. And so what I'm telling my engineers is, please just get used to it, play with it, work with it.
That's what I'm telling mine.
It's going to take about 6 months to get comfortable, and by then it's going to be good.
Yeah. You said that when the last time we spoke that you've gotten some insights into how these agents actually operate under the hood. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just think so. To me, there's the agents, there's always going to be some system level prompt they've been given that's completely opaque to us.
Can you define that, the system level prompt versus the user prompt?
Yeah, so it's like what did Anthropic or what did OpenAI instruct the agent to act as, right? Mm-hmm. So it's what to me it's the other thing that makes it different than generic Gen AI in an agent is I've prompted it. So for example, a behavior of Claude is it always creates a to-do list. You don't have to tell it to do that. Anthropic has prompted it at the system level to always create a to-do list and to always report status to the user. Or so you can hard code. So a lot of the behavior that makes it agentic is at the system level, and also how nice it is, how sycophantic, like a lot of these, like ChatGPT is known for like really wanting to please you and compliment.
5.0 is a little less, I guess.
Yes. So that's all system level prompting. And so I think the reason why I like Sonnet so much is because I think they've done the most at the system level to prompt it to be a good software engineer. And I think that's, that was a business decision they made. I think they're like, we're just going to own the coding use case. And now it's always going to be do you believe in a general purpose model that's been prompted to do a specific task, or are we going to have task specific models? And I think that's going to be an interesting debate. So system level prompt, we have no control over. All the models have a concept of a user level prompt though, where you can basically give it your instructions to how you want it to behave. So for example, I always give my agent a prompt to create a local repository, commit frequently to it, and push that to my GitHub. If you don't tell it to do those things, it'll gladly create the code and never save it. And it's almost like you have to tell it, no, save it locally, push to my branch or whatever. And so there's things like that I can do at the user level. What we learned the hard way is if the user level prompt conflicts with anything at the system level prompt, the entire IQ of the model drops. Because it's basically like, okay, you human have no idea what you're doing. This prompt said always commit, this prompt says never commit. I'm actually just going to trust you less now. And I'm being a little...
You're saying this is what the model does?
This is what the actual, like how the models work. And I don't know if they're making a conscious decision to be stupider. I'm just saying the net result is what feels like an IQ drop because it has conflicting information. And so a lot of the steps it's taking, it's throwing out because it's like, well, I got confused as to what you wanted me to do. Well, the problem is we have no idea what's in the system prompt. And so a lot of what we have done with customers is almost reverse engineer the system prompt because we're tweaking the user prompt constantly and some tweaks make it get stupid and we're like, well, obviously it was prompted the opposite. And so you can almost reverse engineer what, the big labs are telling these models to go do. And so we've sort of developed this kind of set of best practices that we recommend customers do at the user prompt level to get the most out of the agent without going so far that it becomes less effective. So anyway, that was probably the hardest earned because that was a lot of
when you say you reverse this, is this something you've built into your product or just something that you recommend that your clients, developers do when they prompt it?
Yeah, and here's where coder's really annoying. Depends, right? So
okay.
For most customers, like if, again, I go to those large enterprises, they have no idea what they're doing. And so they want us to have all that best practice. And so, again, what we do is we just package that prompt up as a module and say, if you want our best practices prompt, just check this box. And when we instantiate the agent, we'll pipe that in. The more sophisticated customers are like, never mind. So it's almost like a light switch. You turn it on or off. Mm-hmm. And then one of the things that we try to do is maintain this registry so that we can kind of keep the long tail of possible things available, and then you're just pulling down from the registry. Like, for example, we'll have a user prompt module that makes it a really good test engineer versus a really good doc writer, right? Because there's just slightly different things you can tweak it to do. So it's almost like persona specific. And then I think what I've seen is a lot of customers use it as a get started, and then over time they get comfortable editing that prompt. But we're not doing anything magical. We're literally pushing just configuration files that the agent reads. And then if you want us to populate that configuration file or leave it blank, up to you.
And if you're a small startup, you've got 3 developers, and you want to use the open source product, is it any harder to use in the open source version? Like, you have a little more setup you have to do yourself? Like,
no.
What are the differences between, just at a high level, between like what you get for like if you're the 50 plus people that it's worth getting the full experience versus what you have to do if you're a startup doing it yourself?
Yeah, I think, another thing I would tell a lot of startups is if you're happy developing on laptops and just pushing code into, Gits and pipelines, there's probably not a whole lot of benefit to then suddenly centralizing the entire development environment and making people remotely access it.
But what if you're afraid? What if you're concerned about running an agent locally from like a security perspective?
Right. So that's exactly where, unless ... the agent security, because we've had plenty of horror stories of an agent that was run locally on a laptop that accidentally grabbed a credential that it wasn't supposed to, because it inherits the privilege level of its human. One of the things we do by default is I hate to use sort of the zero trust terminology, but we start it at nothing and layer on its credentials. But more importantly, we allow the human and the agent to be in the same environment with 2 totally different privilege levels. So as a human, I can do everything in Git, whereas maybe my agent is restricted to just a handful of commands. And so we can prevent the deleting the database horror story kind of thing. So, sorry, did you have a question?
But where I was going was like, okay, I want to, like, I've got plenty of clients who might be interested in this, right?
Yeah.
And I tell them, all right, you use the open source version. Do you just put it up in your cloud provider, or can you run it on your laptop as well?
Yeah, could do both. It's actually a really small, lightweight binary. It's really easy to install. Where I'm cheating is if you don't have a little bit of Terraform expertise, or at least you're not willing to kind of go through an hour of initial configuration, then Coder's not going to make, like, it's not a...
There's some setup.
There's some setup. Because it's infrastructure. It's plumbing. Right? But once you do it, it's it. So, and that's true of open source or paid or whatever. So to me, again, that's why I just have to say the juice is worth the squeeze. If you're trying to run...
You're already, even today, every time someone has to like set up their local Docker, there's always some headache with that. So I don't know. It's not like you're coming from an area of zero headache to begin with. That,
And like what's awesome about modern development environments is there's dot files, there's dev containers. Like, there's a lot that can be done to configure an environment to the user specification in an automatic way. So we spend a lot of our smaller customers make it so that it's almost 100% parity between running it on a Mac or connecting to it, because, we can configure VS Code to be the same. Where it gets a little bit wonky is maybe you're a JetBrains shop and JetBrains is a little clunkier or something to that effect. But otherwise,
because it takes more resources and it's a little slower. Is it like laggy on your system, or is it
for JetBrains?
Yeah.
Like IntelliJ as an example. It's just an older architecture, and so it has a thicker client component to it that is hard. So it basically still you're almost like bolting a remote tunnel onto it rather than a more elegant architecture where the browser-based ones are. And then, Cursor is a really good example of an in-between. Cursor is a local desktop app, right? It does not run in a browser, at least to my knowledge yet. But because it can run most VS Code extensions, Coder shows up as an extension to it and connects to it. And so what's happening is we're basically a remote file system for Cursor. Mm-hmm. So you're getting local keyboard, video, mouse memory, but the second you commit the code or send the code, it's not hitting local disk. It's going out across the wire and getting stored behind the firewall. And so it's because of security concerns, or because I want an agent to have access to it, or because I'm trying to do something with a GPU that I don't have on my laptop. Those three use cases are the reason why smaller companies would bother to go through the configuration hassle of Coder, is mm-hmm. they want one of those three benefits.
Mm-hmm.
As you may know, I run a vetted talent platform called Scalable Path, and I'm offering a 20% discount to listeners of the podcast. So if you're interested in scaling your dev team faster and smarter, visit scalablepath.com/commit.
Okay, so it takes some setup, but it's doable and you can do it for free. So that's cool.
And we try to make the registry as like a giant set of recipes. So it's like if I'm an AWS shop that's using Jupyter to set up Python, like there's an exact recipe. You go click, 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 and it pushes down the configuration. So we've tried to make it easy, but it's not SaaS.
Yeah, going back to sort of the previous topic we were on with who's coding with AI and who's not, and this adoption curve. I mean, one thought I've been having this week is I'm interested to get your take on it. I mean, first you had people programming with computers. They were doing crazy things with little punch cards, and then there was assembly language, and then there was some languages that I don't even know, like Fortran, and then there was C, and it kept getting higher level languages and less details that you had to worry about, like memory management. And it almost, I don't know if this is a crazy way to think of it, but it's almost like we're about to take the leap from not even needing to know coding languages. We've extracted it up to English, where you just need to know how to code in English. And now it's really how well you can communicate in English what you want an app to do. And so on one side of the spectrum, there's vibe coding, what we're all calling vibe coding, where it's you might not be that good at prompting, and you do it and it gets kind of right, and then you refine it and you eventually mold it into what you want, but you don't really know what the code was doing. And then on the other end, there could be, of course, there's the difference between a greenfield app and a app that you're adding a feature to or fixing a bug on. But let's take the greenfield example. You write the best spec ever. You really think it through, and you give that to an agent, in an environment with all these tools. That could have an extreme, I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, I think so too, yeah.
And then even when and I'm very curious, what that format is, is there an optimal spec way to communicate in English with agents? That's what I'm very curious about. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, and I can compare it to something, but first of all, I completely subscribe to that thought, which is, I do think English is the new language. Today it's written, typing, but I still think soon it's going to be voice. It's not long before I'm just chatting with an agent. And so to me, that's super interesting. But again,
I think to put a pin in that, well, I don't know, putting a pin isn't the right expression, but to pause on that, like, I think chatting with an agent kind of might push you over into the vibe coding thing.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, for a tiny task, you're like, oh yeah, there's this little bug on this page or in this part of the app, and go fix it, but like, if you wanted to really do something complex, I don't think having a conversation about it is the way to go. You need to think about it, right? And write it down, or am I wrong? Like,
no, I think you're more right than wrong. I think depends on, like, I could put, we do, like many, we have our own coding agent called Blink, and I can put it into voice mode and say, hey, Blink, let's get started on a project. Let's just start by, I want to do X, Y, Z. Repeat back to me what you think. And so it's going to walk. So it's probably not saving you any time versus just reading and typing. I think where it'll get interesting, where voice will be, because I think you're right, voice is for vibe coding. Where it'll probably get a lot more interesting is when I trust these agents more. And what I really want is, I don't know if you've ever put like OpenAI or ChatGPT rather into deep research mode. And then I have an iPhone, and then right there on my iPhone, I'm kind of getting status updates about it. And then when it's done, it lets me know. I think that's where we're going to get with coding, where we're going to give it a longer lived task. I'm going to see right there in a visual cue how it's doing. And at any point in time, I might just want to be like, hey, little buddy, how you doing? And it's like, oh, I'm still chugging along on the problem. But it'll tell me when it's done. That only works when I have a high degree of trust that that time away is spent productively. And again, I think there's a lot you can do today to get it to that state, but it does take some heavy lifting, setting up MCP. And sorry, what I was going to say though is like an example I have is some of the folks in my organization that are my two heaviest users are vibe coders. It's my head of people and my finance guy. And it's because when they talk to an agent, they're not developers. They actually give it really detailed instructions. I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and tell me about that. And so it ends up having really effective output. Whereas I think a developer, ironically, gives it less detail because they need less detail to complete a task. And so they're just not used to parceling out all that inner monologue stuff. And so I think we're at a weird point where actually the less you know might actually help you get higher quality.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, how you said, I think you were saying Claude Sonnet like always gives you its to-do list. And I was just watching a demo video for this new OpenSui by LangChain. Have you seen this thing? And that actually
I know of it. Yeah.
gives you an environment too, which is validating what you're doing. And it gives you the plan, right? And you can modify the plan. And I think we're going to start leaning on it instead of right now. I was telling you like, yeah, we should really communicate to an agent what we want the software to do. And I think people are inherently lazy, and they're going to want to say, this is what I want to do, and then give me a plan. And then they're going to skim the plan. And then what will really determine whether this works is how good that agent plan was. Because we're probably going to go along with most of it. And this is just an interesting era we're going into.
It is. And the thing I advise a lot of companies I talk to is forget AI. In the human world, do you use summer interns? And if the answer is no, they're a pain. Don't use AI, because I don't think you have the right mindset to make AI effective. It is like an intern. You have to invest time in it. It's not going to be super valuable right out of the gate, but 6 months later, it's going to be awesome. And you're going to know how to work with it. It's going to know how to work with you. You'll have learned together. And so the question is it's a talent development pipeline. Do you want to invest the time and energy to make a junior resource a more effective mid-level resource? If that's part of your DNA and culture, you're going to love AI. You'll have a mindset of curiosity and learning and teaching and asking questions and the joy of figuring out what prompt does this. If you are like, I am too busy, I don't have time to teach anybody anything, AI is going to feel like a boat anchor around, at least agentic AI will feel like a boat anchor.
That's usually a bad sign when someone is, or a company is like that. Like I'm in the business of providing software developers to a lot of startups, and the numbers that I just heard on a podcast from a guy from Carta were that, I think in 2022, in January, something like 70,000 developers were hired. And then in 2023, it was 40,000. In 2024, it was 30,000. And we're in this market where people are, capital has been, pulling back, and there's been fewer companies getting funded. But also people are starting to use AI. And for me, as a company that provides developers, to get an edge, I think that we have to be providing developers who know how to use this stuff. And so me, it's an investment in, just as you said, like a human resources. Like you if you're going to win in this productivity or even in this talent space, you've got to provide the most productivity. And if you're providing developers that know how to work with these people that are maybe now interns, but and know this whole stack and know how to use it, I think that's going to be an edge, whether you're in my business or whether you're just a company. So
I love that mindset. I don't have the same doom and gloom outlook where I think software engineers are screwed. I think this is going to take a long time for it to have a truly eroding effect on our talent pool, right? Because it's just not ready. And I mean, we still have mainframes running core banking applications, right? Change is hard for humans. I think we're going to quickly, though, get to a point where we cap a lot of our investments in, and we're not going to end this ever escalating race to hire more and more software developers. And we're going to get net a lot more software out of the developers we already have.
Yeah.
And so to your point, I think it's about how do I kind of 2x or 3x someone's productivity level more so than replace them. Where it'll be interesting in my mind is I don't think a developer equals a software engineer anymore. I think a developer equals a systems thinker who can break problems down and parcel out tasks and speak in plain English. And so to me, we'll probably end up with net more developers, even if we have net fewer software engineers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the type of people that can be developers won't necessarily be people that know how to code even.
Right. Like I can imagine we're going to end up in a world where some vibe coder in every department becomes that department's developer. And over time, they're building applications for the whole team. And so I think we'll end up with a ton more software being produced in the world, which gives me hope. But I do worry that if you don't have an AI forward mindset, you'll probably get replaced by someone who is more proficient with AI.
Yep, I agree. Well, anything else you want to touch on?
No, I love these chats. It would be awesome to trade more notes because it's such a fascinating time to be in this industry.
Indeed. So, this is your chance to, drop a line for what you want people to check out. I mean, your company's at coder.com. Anything else you want them to know?
Open source is GitHub/Coder. So that's where you can get started there. And then, like I said, we are coming up with our own coding agent, Blink. It's at blink.so. Right now, if you go, you can kind of get a public access to it, but we'll be rolling it out very shortly. So, and that's based on my founder's learning, setting up so many agents for other customers. He's like, I think I can build a better agent. Cool. And so I think we're just in this really weird agentic arms race right now.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, I'll be interested to check that out when it drops.
Yeah, I'll give you a private invitation.
All right. Thanks, man. All right. Thanks for joining. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Commit and Push. If you found it valuable, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you're building a team, check out scalablepath.com to find top developers. Until next time, keep building, keep pushing.